Welcome to week 4. We're ready to dive into advice you can trust, the great words of Proverbs. But before we get to Proverbs, it seems like it's a good time to sum up our biblical themes. We've been talking about 7 biblical themes, and maybe it's good to just have a one moment for each one reminder of what these 7 themes are. We've seen them already, but you're going to see them again and again and again. And we want you to be familiar and able to use them interchangeably as new stories come along. So with the visual that we use, let's go back. First one was instant perfection, patient relationship. I talked about our old cars. We bought a complete piece of junk. And over years and years, my dad and I finally worked it out into something much better. But it wasn't instant or perfection. It was patient relationship. God does that. In fact, he does both, doesn't he? We've seen him instantly, perfectly create the world and yet also show a relationship that's about relationship and patience above all things, not perfection. That's one. Next one, it's not the first but the second that counts. I talked about, it wasn't much of a car, that first one, really. I have no desire to go back and find a 1980 Chevy Citation. But hey, that 87 Taurus wagon, not bad. In fact, I saw one just yesterday and I thought to myself, that was a pretty good car. Really still good. It's not the first, it's the second that counts. You've seen that too, not just in ordinary life, but we've seen it so often as God prefers the second. It shows his creativity. It tells us to be patient. It says, have faith. Even if the first is not good, the second is coming. That's the second one of ours. God cures with the illness itself. We like to cure with opposites. But God says something, in fact, that, you have no energy? Go out, go running. Go for a long walk. You say you have no strength. Go do something that requires strength, and the illness becomes the cure. And God does that. He did best, of course, with the serpents, didn't he? And when the serpents were destroying the people, looking at a bronze serpent became the cure. And we're going to see that one. It's especially at the point of death. When Jesus is on the cross, his death is the answer to death. God cures with the illness itself. Grace upends your world. Used a crowbar for this one. Remember the people of Israel? They're like a big rock. They have been not moving, slaves for 400 years. And now the good news of grace comes to them. But what's going to move them? Well, grace can't just be a gentle polishing. Grace can't leave them where they are. Grace has to come like a crowbar and pry them out. And it's going to upend their world. They're going to make bricks without straw. They're going to have to go through the plagues. They're going to live 40 years in the desert. Grace upends your world. It's not an easy or simple thing. It might not even be as pleasant as we expected, but that's a biblical theme. One in place of us all. Remember the rock-throwing Ross? Yeah. Are we happy with this principle at first? No, because it doesn't seem fair. But in the end, one stands in place of us all. And the accomplishment of one, going to state and shot put, comes to all of us. And God does the same thing. He heaps on all of us the failure of Adam and Eve. But here's the good news. The accomplishment of the second Adam comes to all of us. And that same theme is worked with kings, David, for instance, prophets, priests, sacrifices. All of them have the same theme. Remember the rock, one in place of us all. Greatness ought to look like greatness. We had this wonderful reading from Bruce Catton's book, and the reminder that, how does a general look? He could look magnificent, or he could be in a mud-splattered private's jacket. But greatness is what happens, what gets done. And God has a greatness that goes both ways. Sometimes we see an apparent, obvious greatness in God's miracles, his actions, his glory. And sometimes we see a greatness that we have to really squint and look hard to recognize. It's a strange greatness. And finally, joy comes in the morning. For that one, we talked about the clock, my little friend, the clock. It's ticking on, and it's just after 1 o'clock, and you were hoping that it was going to be so much further. And this endless night never seems to hurry. But don't you despair. The night eventually passes. It does. It has to. And joy comes in the morning. And I think God says the same thing to us. There's a biblical theme. You might be in a long night, and many were, and their nights went on longer than ours probably, but joy comes in the morning. So those 7 themes we've seen them already. Please continue to see them. It'd be wonderful if you would volunteer these themes as we go through the class. Not always am I asking deliberately specific questions about each or any of these themes, but if you see them in the coming episodes of life as it unfolds in both Old Testament and also, especially in the New Testament, volunteer and say, hey, isn't this just like, and then God curing with illness itself? And I'll say, you're absolutely right. And many times, in fact, I'm sure I'm going to say, thank you for saying that. I never saw it myself. You're going to show me something new. So thank you for your use of the 7 themes. Well, now let's just say a word about Proverbs. I love Proverbs because it's advice you can trust. That's hard to do, isn't it? Advice you can trust. We're in an information-rich world, and yet you and I quickly know that Googling anything is not certainty. Googling anything just fills the space, but it's not exactly advice you can trust. What advice can you trust? I'm going to give you 3 examples here visually. I love this one. My mother was a one-room country school teacher on the prairies of Minnesota for 9 years. This is one of the books that she had in the library of that one-room country school. It's from 1936. It's called Good Manners for Girls. Oh, it's fantastic. Think of this, 1936. It's telling by Inez Haynes Irwin how you should behave in 1936. My mother started teaching in 1939. I love the titles of the chapters. For instance, Good Manners at Home. Your mother, your father, the rest of the family, your servants. Probably not many young ladies are worrying about how to be in contact with their servants. By the way, servants come up again. Small Change in Manners. This title is about telephoning or letter writing, motoring and dancing, conversation and eating. Is this advice you'd still use today? It's a fun read, by the way. Some things, yes, some things, probably not. I've got the Model T service manual. It's called the Model T Bible in the Model T world. It tells you exactly how to take apart and put back together everything in a Model T Ford. This is a reprint of the actual service manual Ford put out in the 19-teens and 1920s. By the way, this is advice you can trust. Absolutely. Nothing's changed. The Model T is how it is. It's still put together the same way. It's advice you can trust. Or my favorite here, recipes. I love food. My wife's a fantastic cook. She has virtually every cookbook made by the Taste of Home people. And the fun thing about Taste of Home, I don't know if you know this, but these recipes come to you from individuals. And when they come, for instance, Denise Nyland of Panama City, Florida, Denise tells you how to make this. Just opened up by chance. Now, do you know Denise Nyland of Panama City, Florida? I don't think so. Would you trust that she's a good cook? Who knows? The charm of this is, of course, that the folks down at Taste of Home have tried it out. And if they say, hey, Denise is onto something, this is good stuff, it's advice you can trust. There you go, complete with the pictures. I like the pictures. What's advice you can trust? Timeless advice. Well, Proverbs obviously gives us exactly that advice, doesn't it? This is advice from a father to a child. You know, the context of Proverbs is Solomon is saying to his son, my son, here's what you need to do. Don't follow foolishness. It's out there asking for you to come along. Instead, listen to advice that you can trust. The fear of the Lord is the beginning or foundation of wisdom. That's advice you can trust. And from there on, the specifics flow. You'll have a wonderful time reading those specific chapters of Proverbs and distilling that advice in so many ways. One of the parts that I especially love is the go to the ant sections. You know, in chapter 6, and also other places, go to the ant is held up. And Solomon must have been an active fellow, and he certainly has that expectation of his son. Don't be like the sluggard who can't even lift his hand enough to feed himself. Go to the ant instead, and look how the ant, the simple ant, knows how to prepare for winter, to be energetic and get things done. Hey, if the ant knows this much, what about you? That's a great expectation from Solomon to his son. What, besides that, many other great themes of forgiveness and generosity. That which you do will be returned unto you. Finally, let's look at two other keys in the book of Proverbs. Chapter 30 does a wonderful job. In chapter 30, beginning with verse 15, you have 5 headings that start out. There are 4 things that are. And then the 5 categories come. Things that are never satisfied, that are wonderful, that are unbearable, that are wise, that are noble. When Solomon says there are 4, it's not Solomon at that point. When the writer says there are 4, I think he's inviting us to make a 5th. Hebrew repetition, saying the same thing but with a forward step. What's your next one? Here's my suggestion. You'll add yours. When he says there are 4 things that never say enough, I think of the person who always wants to be praised. You can heap praise on them today. They'll be just as hungry and demanding for it tomorrow. They never say enough. What's the thing that is wonderful, marvelous, besides the ones that he gives? It seems to me, birds that return back to their homes. Isn't that a marvelous thought? Birds that return to their homes, though they're just birds. Wow, who would have thought? Unbearable. Things that are unbearable. And one that strikes me is when that one who we know is wrong gets off, in fact goes beyond getting off, somehow they profit by it. Our world is filled with experiences where there's someone who, by all accounts, it appears is wrong. But they're not penalized. In fact, they're benefited by it. It's unbearable. Small but wise is the 4th category, and here's my favorite. Small but wise, the cat that rules the house. We had a wonderful cat named Rocky. He's the best cat that ever lived. I loved Rock, and Rock loved me. But he ruled the house. If Rocky wanted to sit in that chair, he sat in that chair. And you really couldn't bear to move him because, well, he was the cat that ruled the house. It's just, that's how it was. He let us live in it because, of course, we brought in the food. But he was small, but very wise. And finally, noble. What's noble? The athlete crossing the line. Think the Olympics or some other athletic moment that you love. That's mine. Well, you do yours. I'm looking forward to what you come up with when he says there are 3, no 4. And lastly, we end with the wise woman. It's an interesting thing that Proverbs starts with Solomon speaking to his son. And that's wonderful. But he goes beyond that. And the end of this Proverbs is not the son grown up or Solomon saying, again, some advice. We'd expect that. But the wise woman. It's either the wife or the mother, or it's an independent woman, but she's a wonderful picture of here's what wisdom looks like. She is wonderful. She laughs at the days to come. Strength and dignity are hers. She's praised by everyone. What a great picture. That's the embodiment of advice you can trust. So enjoy the 7 biblical themes. Use them in our times to come. Volunteer their use as we see them, and enjoy these pieces of advice from Proverbs that they have lasted for thousands of years. They're still going to last. I think they're advice you can trust.